The scale read 247 pounds, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Standing in the cramped bathroom of our two-bedroom apartment in East Cleveland, wearing my father's old t-shirt that used to be baggy on me but now stretched tight across my stomach, I felt like I was drowning in my own body. "Freya, breakfast." Mom called from the kitchen, her voice carrying that familiar mix of love and worry that had defined my childhood. I stared at my reflection in the cracked mirror above our second-hand sink. 24 years old, 5 feet 4 inches, and heavier than I'd ever imagined possible. The girl who used to dance in church choirs and lead youth group activities had disappeared under layers of shame, stress, and what felt like 1,000 failed promises to myself. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was getting ready for my job at the community health center, where I spent 8 hours a day filing insurance claims for people seeking medical help, many of them dealing with diabetes, heart disease, and other conditions I knew were creeping toward my own future like shadows at sunset. How had someone who grew up in a household where my grandmother's garden provided half our meals, where we walked everywhere because we couldn't afford a car, where physical work was just part of daily survival, how had I become this person who couldn't climb a flight of stairs without gasping? The answer lived in the contradiction that had been haunting me for years. I came from a family that valued discipline, faith, and perseverance, yet I'd become someone who quit everything related to my health before I'd barely started. "Lord, give me strength," I whispered, the same prayer I'd been saying every morning for 3 years. But strength for what? To start another diet I'd abandon in 2 weeks? To join another gym I'd use twice before finding excuses? To buy another workout program that would gather dust while I convinced myself that tomorrow would be different? In the kitchen, Mom was packing my lunch, a turkey sandwich, an apple, and a homemade cookie that she made because store-bought has too many chemicals. At 62, she still moved with the energy of someone who'd spent her life cleaning other people's houses, raising 3 kids on welfare, and never missing a Sunday service. Her body showed the wear of hard work, but there was a vitality in her that I envied. "Baby, you look tired," she said, studying my face with those eyes that missed nothing. "I'm fine, Mama." She handed me my lunch. "You know, your cousin Jasmine called yesterday. Said she's lost 30 pounds doing that program where you count points." Here it was, the daily reminder of my failure disguised as helpful suggestion. Jasmine, who'd always been the pretty cousin, the one who'd married well and lived in the suburbs, the one who made our family gatherings feel like performance reviews of who was succeeding and who wasn't. "That's great for her," I managed. "I'm just saying, maybe you could." "I have to go to work." The bus ride to the health center gave me 45 minutes to spiral into the familiar cycle of self-loathing and determination that had become my morning routine. I'd scroll through Instagram, seeing before and after photos of women who looked like they'd found some secret I couldn't access. I'd open my notes app and start writing yet another day one plan. Monday, 6 a.m. workout, salad for lunch, no snacking Tuesday, run 3 miles, meal prep Wednesday, gym class, healthy dinner. By the time I reached my stop, I'd have crafted another perfect week that would last exactly until Tuesday afternoon, when stress and exhaustion would send me to the vending machine for comfort I couldn't find anywhere else. But this morning was different. This morning, the scale had shown me a number that meant I'd gained back the 12 pounds I'd lost last spring, plus 8 more for good measure. This morning, I'd seen my father glance at me with that look, not judgment, exactly, but the kind of worried recognition that comes from watching someone you love hurt themselves slowly. Dad had been a construction worker until his back gave out when I was 16. He understood bodies that betrayed you, dreams that had to be adjusted, strength that had limits. But he'd also taught me that quitting isn't in our DNA, that our family had survived poverty, discrimination, and setbacks by never giving up. So why couldn't I apply that same persistence to my own body? Why did every fitness attempt feel like trying to build a house on quicksand? The harder I worked, the faster everything collapsed. Walking into the health center, I passed the bulletin board covered with flyers for diabetes support groups, weight management classes, and cardiac rehabilitation programs. All the places where people like me ended up when the consequences of our choices became medical emergencies instead of just personal disappointments. Not me, I whispered, touching the cross necklace that had been my grandmother's. Not this time. But even as I said it, I could feel the familiar pattern starting, the surge of motivation that would carry me through a few days of perfect behavior before reality set in and I'd find myself back where I started, heavier and more hopeless than before. The question that would haunt me for the next 6 months was simple but devastating. Was I destined to repeat this cycle forever, or was there something fundamentally wrong with how I was approaching the entire journey? I had no idea that the answer would come from learning the difference between quitting and resting, a lesson that would change not just my body, but my entire understanding of what it means to persevere. The restart lasted exactly 11 days. 11 days of 5:30 a.m. workouts in my tiny bedroom, following YouTube videos while trying not to wake my parents. 11 days of meal prepping on Sundays and carrying Tupperware containers to work like armor against temptation. 11 days of feeling like maybe, finally, I was someone who could stick to a plan. Then came day 12, a double shift at the health center because our office manager called in sick, followed by an emergency visit to the hospital where my father was admitted with chest pains that turned out to be stress-related but scared us all into temporary insanity. By the time I got home at 11 p.m., I was running on coffee and adrenaline. The leftover casserole my mother had made called to me from the refrigerator like a siren song. Just this once, I told myself. Because of the circumstances. Just this once became just today, became just this week, became another month of weight gain and self-loathing. The cycle repeated with variations throughout the summer. I'd find a new program, keto, intermittent fasting, a 30-day challenge from some fitness influencer who looked like she'd never struggled with anything harder than choosing between two perfect options. I'd throw myself into it with the intensity of someone trying to save her own life, which, in a way, I was. Each attempt felt different. This time, I'd tell myself, I understood the science better. I'd downloaded apps to track macros, bought a food scale, joined online communities where people posted their perfect meal prep photos and talked about lifestyle changes like they were easy to make. But every program demanded the same thing, perfection. No cheat meals, no missed workouts, no acknowledgement that life might interfere with your carefully planned schedule. When my cousin's wedding required a weekend in Cincinnati, my keto plan crumbled. When I got bronchitis and couldn't work out for a week, my fitness streak died with it. The worst part wasn't the physical backsliding, it was the psychological warfare that accompanied each failure. I'd lie awake at 2 a.m., calculating how much weight I could lose if I just stuck to a plan for 3 months, 6 months, a year. I'd torture myself with math that proved transformation was possible, if only I could find the willpower that seemed to come so naturally to everyone else. Maybe you're not meant to be skinny, my coworker Denise said one afternoon as I picked at a sad desk salad while she enjoyed a slice of birthday cake from the office celebration. Some people are just built different. Denise meant well, but her words hit like a physical blow. Not meant to be healthy? Not built for transformation? The suggestion that my struggles weren't about method or timing but about some fundamental inadequacy felt like a death sentence. The research I did in my spare time only made things worse. I'd read about women who'd lost 100 pounds and kept it off, about the neuroscience of habit formation, about willpower and motivation and discipline. But none of the success stories looked like my life. None of them worked double shifts to pay off their parents' medical bills. None of them lived in food deserts where the closest gym was a 40-minute bus ride away. None of them came from families where loving someone meant feeding them, where celebration and comfort and connection all centered around kitchens and dining tables. The breaking point came in October, 6 months after that morning on the scale. I'd just finished another failed attempt, this time a program that promised you could transform your body in 21 days if you just followed their exact protocol. 21 days of early mornings, expensive supplements, and workouts that left me exhausted before my real day even began. I'd made it to day 18 before my car broke down, my father had another health scare, and I missed 3 days in a row. When I tried to restart, the program felt impossible. How had I ever thought I could sustain that level of intensity? Standing in my bedroom at midnight, surrounded by workout gear I'd barely used and diet books that promised easy solutions, I finally admitted the truth that had been growing like a tumor in my chest. I was going to be fat forever. Not because I was lazy or weak or destined for failure, but because every approach I'd tried demanded a version of myself that didn't exist, someone with unlimited energy, perfect circumstances, and the ability to prioritize fitness above everything else in her life. The shame was crushing. Here I was, working in healthcare, surrounded by evidence of what happens when people don't take care of their bodies, and I couldn't figure out how to take care of my own. My grandmother had survived the Great Depression and segregation and single motherhood, and I couldn't survive a workout program. That night, I deleted every fitness app from my phone, threw away my food scale, and ate an entire sleeve of cookies while crying in front of late-night television. If I was going to fail anyway, at least I could stop pretending I was going to succeed. But even in my surrender, a small voice in the back of my mind whispered a question that wouldn't go away. What if the problem wasn't my lack of willpower, but my understanding of what willpower actually meant? I pushed the thought aside. I'd had enough revelations and new understandings to last a lifetime. What I needed was to accept reality and stop torturing myself with the fantasy that I could be someone I wasn't. I had no idea that 3 weeks later, a chance encounter with a trainer from California would show me that I'd been asking all the wrong questions about transformation, rest, and what it really means to never quit. The community health fair was the last place I expected to find answers about anything other than free blood pressure screenings and pamphlets about diabetes prevention. But my supervisor had volunteered our entire office to help with registration, which meant spending a cold November Saturday directing elderly residents toward flu shot stations and pretending enthusiasm I didn't feel. I was manning the information table, mechanically handing out tote bags stuffed with health brochures, when a woman approached. Who didn't fit the usual demographic of our events. She was probably in her 30s, athletic but not intimidatingly so, with the kind of confident energy that made you stand up straighter just being around her. "Hi there," she said, reading my name tag. "Freya." I love that name. "I'm Katy Martinez, and I'm wondering if you can point me toward whoever's organizing the wellness presentations?" Something in her manner made me actually look up from my volunteer checklist. "Are you one of the speakers?" "I am. I'm doing a session on sustainable fitness at 2 p.m. Though I have to say, I'm a little nervous. I usually work with clients one-on-one, not groups." "What kind of clients?" I asked, curiosity overriding my usual social anxiety. "People who've tried everything and think they're hopeless," she said with a laugh that didn't sound like she was making fun of anyone. "I specialize in helping folks who've been on the fitness roller coaster for years." I must have made some expression because her face immediately softened. "Sorry, that probably sounded flippant. I don't mean to make light of it. I know how brutal that cycle can be." "You do?" "Girl, I lived it for 10 years. Start strong, quit fast, feel terrible, repeat. I probably restarted my fitness journey more times than I can count before I figured out what was going wrong." There was something in the way she said it, not like someone who'd always been fit talking down to someone who wasn't, but like someone sharing a hard-won truth with a fellow traveler. What was going wrong? I heard myself ask. Katy glanced around the busy health fair, then leaned closer. The programs I was following were designed for people who didn't exist. People with unlimited time, energy, and perfect circumstances. I kept trying to fit my real life into someone else's fantasy schedule. So what changed? I learned the difference between quitting and resting. Game changer. She pulled a business card from her pocket. "I'm actually here from California visiting family, but I do virtual coaching. If you're interested in learning more, my session this afternoon goes into the research behind why traditional fitness approaches fail most people." I took the card, reading Katy Martinez, certified personal trainer, student of Jillian Michaels' methodology. The Jillian Michaels part caught my attention. I'd tried several of her programs over the years, always burning out within weeks. "You studied with Jillian Michaels?" "I did. But here's the thing, her approach works amazingly well for certain people in certain circumstances. The problem is when we try to apply elite athlete strategies to regular folks dealing with real-life constraints. Our conversation was interrupted by a line of people needing information, but Katty promised to find me after her presentation. I spent the next 2 hours distracted, thinking about her phrase, the difference between quitting and resting. At 2 p.m., I slipped into the back of the community center's main room, where maybe 30 people had gathered to hear Katty speak. She'd changed into workout clothes and set up a small presentation screen, but her energy was exactly the same as it had been at my table, warm, real, approachable. "How many of you," she began, "have started a fitness program in January and quit by March?" Almost every hand in the room went up, including mine. "And how many of you felt like failures when that happened?" Same hands. "Here's what I want you to know, you weren't failing. You were responding normally to an abnormal situation." She clicked to her first slide, which showed research from Dr. Michelle Seeger at the University of Michigan. Dr. Seeger followed 1,200 people through fitness programs over 2 years. Want to guess the biggest predictor of who stuck with it long term? A woman in the front row called out. Willpower? Nope. The biggest predictor was flexibility. People who built rest, recovery, and real-life adjustments into their plans were 300% more likely to still be active after 2 years. Katty advanced to another slide showing data from Stanford's Behavior Design Lab. Dr. B.J. Fogg's research proves that motivation is temporary, but systems are permanent. The people who succeed long-term aren't the ones who never take breaks, they're the ones who know how to take breaks without giving up entirely. She had the room's complete attention now. So what does that look like practically? It means if you miss a week because life happens, you don't start over from day one. You just pick up where you left off. It means if you can only work out twice a week instead of 5, you adjust the plan instead of abandoning it. I felt something shift in my chest, not the familiar surge of motivation that accompanied new programs, but something quieter and more sustainable. Recognition, maybe. Here's the key insight, Katty continued, and this comes from research at the University of Toronto by Dr. Janet Polivy. She found that people who view setbacks as normal parts of the process rather than evidence of failure are significantly more likely to achieve their long-term goals. After the presentation, I waited while other attendees asked questions about meal planning and workout schedules. When the room finally cleared, Katty approached me with that same warm energy from earlier. "What did you think?" she asked. "I think I've been quitting when I should have been resting," I said, surprised by my own honesty. "Tell me more about that." So I did. Standing in that empty community center room, I told a stranger from California about my cycles of starting and stopping, about the guilt and shame that accompanied every restart, about feeling like I was fundamentally broken in ways that willpower couldn't fix. "Freya," Katty said when I finished, "everything you just described tells me you're someone who cares deeply about your health and keeps trying despite repeated disappointments. That's not failure, that's persistence." "But I always quit." "No, you always rest. You just haven't learned the difference yet." She explained that what I called quitting was often my body and mind's way of protecting me from unsustainable demands. The key was learning to recognize when I needed to pause, adjust, or scale back without interpreting those needs as personal failures. "Would you be interested in working together?" she asked. "I'm launching a virtual program in January specifically for people who are tired of the all-or-nothing approach. It's called Rest, Don't Quit, and it's designed around the research we talked about today." Looking at her card again, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months, hope that wasn't attached to a perfect plan or an impossible timeline. What would that look like? Learning to build a fitness practice that fits your actual life instead of the life you think you should have. Interested? For the first time in years, saying yes felt like the beginning of something sustainable rather than the setup for another failure. January arrived with the usual barrage of New Year fitness marketing, but for once, I wasn't scrolling through transformation challenges or calculating how much weight I could lose by summer. Instead, I was preparing for my first video call with Caddy, armed with nothing more than a notebook and a willingness to try something completely different. "The first thing we're going to do," Caddy said when her face appeared on my laptop screen, "is throw out everything you think you know about starting a fitness program." She looked relaxed in what appeared to be her home office in Sacramento, wearing a simple tank top and speaking with the easy confidence of someone who'd had this conversation many times before. "No meal plans?" I asked, confused. "No meal plans, no workout schedules, no transformation timelines. We're going to start with something much more important, understanding your actual life." For the next hour, Caddy walked me through what she called a reality assessment. Instead of asking about my fitness goals, she asked about my schedule, my stress levels, my family obligations, my transportation challenges, my kitchen setup, my sleep patterns, and my energy rhythms throughout the week. "Most programs start with the destination," she explained. "We're starting with the vehicle, your actual circumstances and capacity." What emerged was a picture of someone who worked 45 hours a week at a demanding job, helped care for aging parents, lived in a neighborhood with limited safe walking areas, and had exactly 3 hours of genuinely free time on an average weekday. "So when you tried to do hour-long workouts 6 days a week," Caddy observed, "you were essentially trying to create 14 extra hours out of thin air. I thought I was supposed to make it a priority." "You were. But priority doesn't mean abandoning reality." She pulled up a research study from Dr. Wendy Wood at USC. Dr. Wood's habit research shows that sustainable behavior change happens when we design around our existing patterns, not against them. My first assignment was laughably simple: take a 10-minute walk 3 times during the following week. Not at a specific time, not at a specific pace, not with any particular goal except to notice how movement felt in my body after months of inactivity. "That's it?" I asked. "That's it. And Freya? If you miss one of those walks, I want you to notice what happened and why, without any judgment. Data collection, not performance evaluation." The next week, I managed 2 walks out of 3. In my old approach, this would have been evidence of failure and grounds for either recommitting with an even more aggressive plan or giving up entirely. But when I reported back to Caddy, she seemed genuinely pleased. "Tell me about the walk you missed," she said. "Wednesday. Dad had a doctor's appointment that ran late, and by the time we got home, I was exhausted." "So your body and schedule told you that rest was more important than a walk that day?" "I guess." "That's not guessing, that's listening to important information. What if, instead of missing the walk being a problem, it was your system working correctly?" This reframing took weeks to sink in. Caddy introduced me to research from the University of Melbourne showing that people who practice flexible restraint, adjusting their behavior based on current circumstances rather than rigid rules, show better long-term adherence to health behaviors. Slowly, we built what Caddy called a minimum viable routine. 20 minutes of movement, 3 times a week, in whatever form felt accessible on that particular day. Sometimes it was walking, sometimes YouTube yoga, sometimes dancing to music while I cleaned my room. The only rule was that it had to feel manageable on my worst week, not just my best. But when do I start really working out? I asked after a month of what felt like baby steps. "You already are. You've moved your body consistently for 4 weeks. That's more than you accomplished with any of your previous programs." She was right, though it took me longer to see it. I was so conditioned to equate intensity with legitimacy that gentle, sustainable movement felt like I was cheating somehow. The food piece came even slower. Instead of meal plans, Caddy taught me what she called gentle experiments. Add 1 serving of vegetables to whatever I was already eating. Drink water before reaching for the second cup of coffee. Notice how different foods made me feel without labeling them as good or bad. "We're building a relationship with your body based on curiosity rather than control," she explained, referencing research from Dr. Evelyn Tribole on intuitive eating. "The goal is to become someone who makes health-supporting choices because they feel good, not because a plan tells you to." The hardest part wasn't the physical changes, it was learning to interpret my experience differently. When I caught a cold in February and didn't exercise for a week, instead of restarting, I just resumed when I felt better. When work stress led to 3 days of emotional eating, instead of a punishment workout, I practiced the self-compassion techniques Caddy had taught me. "You're learning to have a bad week without having a bad month," she observed during one of our calls. That's the skill that changes everything. By March, something fundamental had shifted. I wasn't dramatically different. I'd lost maybe 8 pounds and could walk up 2 flights of stairs without getting winded. But for the first time in years, I wasn't living in the constant cycle of starting and stopping that had defined my previous attempts. "I feel like I'm actually building something," I told Caddy. "Instead of just trying to force myself into someone else's plan." That's exactly right. You're creating a practice instead of following a program. And practices are designed to last. The real test came when my mother was hospitalized for a week in April, and I spent every spare moment at the hospital or managing family logistics. In my old pattern, this would have derailed everything. Instead, I adjusted my routine to hospital walks and grabbed healthy snacks from the cafeteria when possible, never feeling like I was failing or falling behind. When Mom came home and life returned to normal, I simply returned to my usual pattern without the drama of restarting or the guilt of having fallen off track. "This is what sustainable change looks like," Caddy said when I described navigating the crisis without abandoning my health practices. "Not perfect consistency, but flexible persistence." For the first time in my adult life, I was beginning to understand what it meant to rest without quitting, and how that difference might be the key to everything I'd been trying to achieve. 2 years later, I'm standing in the same cramped bathroom where this journey began, but the woman looking back at me from the mirror is someone I barely recognize, not because of how she looks, though 65 pounds lighter is certainly noticeable, but because of how she stands. Confident. Peaceful. Like someone who's made friends with her own body instead of waging war against it. The scale still lives in our bathroom, but I weigh myself maybe once a month now, and the number doesn't dictate my mood or my choices for the week. More important metrics have taken its place. I can carry groceries up 2 flights of stairs without stopping. I sleep through the night most nights. My blood pressure, which had been creeping toward problematic, is now solidly normal. But the transformation that matters most isn't physical, it's the complete restructuring of how I think about persistence, failure, and what it means to take care of myself. "Freya, you ready?" Mom calls from the kitchen, where she's packing snacks for our Saturday morning walk. At 64, she's become my regular walking partner, inspired by watching me develop a sustainable routine that didn't require perfection or punishment. Our Saturday walk started as one of my gentle experiments 2 years ago, quality time with Mom that happened to involve movement. Now they're the anchor of both our weeks, a time when we catch up on family news and dreams while our feet trace familiar paths through the neighborhood we've both lived in for decades. "Coming, Mama." The community health center where I work has asked me to help develop their new wellness program, not because I'm a fitness expert, but because I understand the gap between what traditional programs offer and what real people actually need. Next month, I'm starting to facilitate support groups for people who've struggled with the start-stop cycle that once defined my own relationship with health. It's not about willpower. I explain to groups of women who remind me of my former self. It's about designing systems that work with your actual life instead of against it. I share the research that Caddy taught me, Dr. Seeker's work on sustainable motivation, Dr. Wood's habit formation studies, Dr. Pallavi's findings about how successful people view setbacks. But more importantly, I share my own story of learning to rest without quitting. Last month, I had what my old self would have called a bad month. Work stress, family obligations, and a minor injury meant I exercised maybe 6 times in 4 weeks and ate more convenience food than I prefer. But instead of the spiral of guilt and recommitment that would have followed this scenario 2 years ago, I simply adjusted my expectations and gently returned to my usual patterns when circumstances allowed. That's what sustainable change looks like, I tell my support groups, echoing Caddy's words from years earlier. Not perfect consistency, but flexible persistence. The most unexpected development has been my relationship with faith. Growing up, I'd learned to think of discipline as a form of moral strength. You either had it or you didn't, and failure meant you were weak or lacking in character. But learning to rest without quitting taught me that true discipline isn't about never faltering, it's about returning to your values again and again, especially when life makes that return challenging. The Lord doesn't call us to be perfect, I told my church's women's group last Sunday, when they asked me to share my transformation story. He calls us to be faithful. And sometimes being faithful to our bodies means resting when we're tired instead of pushing through exhaustion. That distinction, between being perfect and being faithful, has become the foundation not just of my health practices, but of how I approach every area of my life. Caddy and I still talk monthly, though our relationship has evolved from coach-client to something more like colleagues. She's expanding her rest, don't quit methodology and has asked me to help pilot programs specifically for working-class communities and people of color, populations that are often overlooked by mainstream wellness approaches. You understand something that took me years to learn, she told me during our last call. Sustainable change has to be culturally relevant and economically realistic, or it's just another form of privilege masquerading as personal responsibility. We're developing workshops that acknowledge the realities of food deserts, irregular work schedules, family caregiving responsibilities, and limited resources, all the factors that make traditional fitness advice feel impossibly out of reach for people like the woman I used to be. The most powerful moment of this entire journey happened 3 months ago, when my teenage niece Alicia came to stay with us for a week. I found her in the bathroom one morning, staring at the scale with the same devastated expression I remembered from my own rock-bottom moments. "Aunt Freya," she said, tears in her eyes, "I think I'm going to get fat like," she stopped herself, embarrassed. "Like I was?" She nodded miserably. I sat down on the edge of the bathtub and told her something I wish someone had told me at 17, "Alicia, your worth isn't determined by a number on a scale. And if you want to take care of your body, the most important thing you can learn is the difference between resting and quitting." We spent that week cooking together, taking gentle walks, and talking about what it means to listen to your body instead of fighting against it. When she left, she hugged me tight and said, "I want to learn to be healthy like you. Not skinny like me. Not perfect like me. Healthy like me." That night, I realized that everything I'd struggled through, all the failed attempts, the cycles of shame and recommitment, the gradual learning of how to rest without quitting, had led to this moment of being able to offer my niece a different path than the one I'd taken. Standing in my bathroom this morning, getting ready for another day at the health center followed by an evening walk with Mom, I think about all the women who are where I was 3 years ago, convinced they're failures, certain they lack the willpower to change, trapped in cycles that make transformation feel impossible. I want them to know what I've learned: you're not broken. You're not weak. You don't lack discipline. You just need to learn the difference between getting tired and giving up. When you get tired, learn to rest, not to quit. Rest your body when it needs recovery. Rest your expectations when life gets overwhelming. Rest your timeline when circumstances change. But never rest your commitment to coming back. Because that's what transformation really looks like, not a straight line from problem to solution, but a gentle persistence that honors both your aspirations and your limitations. And that kind of persistence? That's something you can maintain for a lifetime.